The air in Nora Winter's apartment smelled like stale coffee and desperation. It was 2 in the morning, and the blue glow of her laptop screen had long since burned itself into her retinas. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with mechanical precision, adjusting the kerning on a logo design for a client who'd already pushed the deadline back twice and would probably ask for a third revision anyway. The radiator in the corner clanked and hissed, offering only the promise of warmth rather than the reality of it. Through the thin walls of the third-floor walk-up, she could hear her neighbor's television, a late-night talk show host's laughter bleeding into her concentrated silence. She leaned back in her thrift store desk chair, the kind that squeaked no matter how carefully you moved, and pressed her palms against her eyes. The rejection email sat 3 messages down in her inbox, still undeleted, because some masochistic part of her needed the reminder. The design position at Morrison & Lake, the one that would have meant health insurance and a steady paycheck and the ability to stop lying to her parents about how well things were going, had gone to someone else. Someone with more experience. Someone who probably hadn't taught themselves graphic design through YouTube tutorials and sheer stubborn determination. Her bank account mocked her from the tab she kept perpetually open. Rent was due in 6 days, student loan payment in 8. The freelance payment from her last client still hadn't cleared, and she was too proud to send a follow-up email that would make her sound as desperate as she felt. Nora Winters had left Marion, Ohio 5 years ago with a second-hand laptop, a portfolio of amateur designs, and absolute certainty that she was destined for something more than her small town could offer. She'd imagined herself in a bright studio apartment, working for a prestigious firm, visiting home for holidays with stories about gallery openings and important clients. Instead, she was 28 years old, alone in a cramped apartment that smelled like her downstairs neighbor's cooking, drinking coffee that had gone cold hours ago, and wondering at what point ambition became delusion. Her phone buzzed. Preston. Still on for tomorrow night? Made reservations at Aurelian, 8 o'clock. She stared at the message, that familiar flutter, not quite excitement, but not quite dread either, moving through her chest. Preston Alcott was handsome in that effortless way that came from good genetics and better tailoring. They'd met 3 months ago at a networking event she'd crashed, and she'd approached her with the kind of confidence that suggested he'd never been rejected in his life. He worked in finance, venture capital, something that sounded important when he explained it, even though she still wasn't entirely sure what he actually did. He took her to restaurants where the menus didn't list prices. He paid without looking at the check. He was charming and attentive in public, though she'd noticed he never invited her to his place, never introduced her to his friends, never posted about her on the social media accounts he checked obsessively. They existed in a strange bubble, just the 2 of them, and she'd told herself that was romantic rather than suspicious. She typed back a confirmation, ignored the small voice that whispered she was settling for someone who made her feel like a secret, and returned to her design work. Morning arrived with weak November sunlight that did nothing to warm the apartment. Nora wrapped herself in an oversized cardigan, the kind she'd stolen from an ex-boyfriend years ago and never returned, and headed downstairs to the building's tiny lobby where the mailboxes lived. She was contemplating the stack of bills she definitely couldn't afford when the building's front door opened, bringing with it a gust of cold air and Owen Fletcher. Her neighbor from 3B looked exactly like he always did, slightly disheveled in a way that suggested he'd just rolled out of bed despite it being almost 9 in the morning. He carried several long planks of lumber over one shoulder with the ease of someone accustomed to physical work, his flannel shirt worn thin at the elbows, his dark hair falling into his eyes. There was a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, a feature she'd always found oddly compelling. And when he smiled at her, it reached all the way to those gray-blue eyes that seemed to notice everything. "Morning," he said, angling the wood carefully through the doorway. "Sorry, coming through." She pressed herself against the mailboxes to let him pass, catching the scent of sawdust and something warm, maybe cinnamon. "What are you building?" "Bookshelves for the school library. Budget cuts meant they were going to throw out damaged ones rather than replace them." He paused, studying her with that quiet attention he had. "You're shivering." Heat's broken again, 3rd time this month. Owen shifted the lumber, considering, I've got a space heater I'm not using from when I was refinishing the floor in my place. You want it? Pride told her to refuse. Pride had been telling her to refuse a lot of things lately, and Pride wasn't paying her rent. But there was something in the way he offered, casual and without expectation, that made it feel less like charity and more like what neighbors did for each other. That would be really helpful, actually. Thank you. I'll bring it by later. He adjusted his grip on the lumber. You heading out? Client meeting. It sounded more professional than admitting she was going to the coffee shop on the corner because they had reliable Wi-Fi and she couldn't afford to keep running her space heater, broken radiator aside. Good luck, he said, and continued up the stairs, the wood balanced perfectly as he navigated the narrow stairwell. Nora watched him go, then shook her head and stepped out into the November cold. Aurelian was the kind of restaurant where the host looked at your shoes before deciding where to seat you. Nora had worn her nicest dress, a dark green thing she'd found at a consignment store and had tailored to fit, and still felt underdressed as she was led through the dining room. Preston was already there, looking perfect in a charcoal suit, his black hair styled with the kind of precision that required professional help. You look beautiful, he said, standing to kiss her cheek. His cologne was expensive, the kind advertised in magazines she couldn't afford to subscribe to. They ordered. He chose wine without asking her preference, a habit she'd stopped commenting on. The conversation flowed in the way it always did, pleasant and surface level. He talked about a deal his firm was closing, about his weekend plans to play golf with colleagues, about a restaurant opening he'd read about. She offered edited versions of her work, making freelance sound intentional rather than desperate, making her tiny apartment sound cozy rather than cramped. The food arrived, beautiful and probably delicious, though she could barely taste it through the anxiety building in her chest. Because there was something she needed to tell him, something that had been confirmed 3 days ago by a drugstore test and then again yesterday by the free clinic 2 neighborhoods over. Preston, she started, her voice steadier than she felt. I need to talk to you about something. He looked up, fork pausing halfway to his mouth, and something in his expression shifted. Not concern, wariness. I'm pregnant. The words hung between them, taking up all the oxygen at their small table. She watched him process the information, watched his face cycle through shock and panic before settling on something smooth and controlled. He set down his fork with careful precision. How far along? 6 weeks. And you're sure? The question stung more than it should have. Yes. Preston leaned back in his chair, his ice blue eyes moving around the restaurant, as if checking whether anyone had overheard. This isn't a good time for me, Nora. Something cold settled in her stomach. There's never a good time for this. I mean, specifically for me. There are things happening in my life right now, professional things, family things. He lowered his voice even further. My engagement announcement is next month. The world tilted slightly. You're what? To Caroline Whitemore, the governor's daughter. It's been arranged for months. You knew I came from that kind of family. He said it as if she should have understood, as if their 3 months together had come with an asterisk she'd somehow missed. You're engaged, she said it flat, letting him hear how it sounded. It's complicated. These things are complicated in my world. He reached across the table, thought better of it, withdrew his hand. I can help you, obviously, financially. My lawyer can draw something up, make sure you're taken care of, but I need discretion. You understand? Nora stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Several nearby diners glanced over. Preston's jaw tightened. Where are you going? Away from you. She walked out of Aurelian with her head high and her heart in pieces, and managed to hold herself together all the way back to her apartment building. It was only when she reached the 3rd floor landing, fumbling with her keys, that everything caught up with her. The rejection, the pregnancy, the revelation that she'd been someone's secret all along. She sank down onto the top step, and finally, blessedly, let herself break. She didn't hear Owen's door open, didn't notice him until he was sitting down beside her on the worn carpet of the landing. He didn't ask what was wrong, didn't offer empty platitudes. He just sat there, solid and present, until she'd cried herself empty. "Whatever it is," he said quietly, "you're not alone in this building. 3B is always open." And somehow, from her neighbor who barely knew her, that simple offer felt like the first real thing anyone had said to her in months. 3 days passed in a fog of avoidance and numb routine. Nora ignored Preston's calls, which started apologetic, and gradually she shifted to something that sounded more like legal concern than actual remorse. She worked on client projects because rent still needed paying and her body still needed feeding, regardless of the small cluster of cells currently rearranging her entire future. She researched prenatal vitamins she couldn't afford and health insurance she didn't qualify for, and tried not to think about how spectacularly her life had veered off course. Owen had been quietly, persistently present. The space heater appeared outside her door the next morning with a note that said simply, "No rush returning it." She'd heard him in the hallway, heard the soft thud of something being set down, and by the time she opened her door, he was already gone. 2 days later, a container of homemade soup materialized in the same spot, still warm, still without expectation of acknowledgement. On the third evening, he knocked. Nora considered pretending she wasn't home, but the light was clearly visible under her door, and they both knew she rarely went anywhere. She opened it to find Owen holding 2 mugs, steam rising from both. "Tea," he said. "Decaf. I'm assuming coffee isn't agreeing with you lately." Her hand went instinctively to her stomach, then froze. "How did you—" "Bathroom door was open when I dropped off the soup, saw the test box in the trash." He offered one of the mugs, his gray-blue eyes steady and without judgment. "Can I come in?" She should have been embarrassed, should have felt exposed. Instead, she felt oddly relieved that someone finally knew, that the secret wasn't just hers to carry anymore. She stepped back, letting him into the cramped studio that was somehow even smaller with another person in it. Owen settled into her second-hand armchair like he belonged there, cradling his mug. "Is the father involved?" No. The word came out harder than she intended. He made that very clear. His loss. Owen said it with such simple certainty that something tight in her chest loosened slightly. "What do you need?" The question surprised her. Not what was she going to do, not had she fought this through, not any of the judgment she'd been inflicting on herself for 3 days straight. Just what did she need? "I don't know," she admitted. "Prenatal care, insurance, a better paying job, a time machine. Can't help with the last one. The rest we can figure out." He set down his mug. "You design websites, right? I've seen your portfolio. It's excellent." "You looked at my portfolio?" "You left your laptop open in the laundry room last month. I was trying to find whose it was to return it. Saw your work. Impressive." He leaned forward slightly. "My students are doing an art show fundraiser next month. We need a website. Nothing fancy, just something to showcase their pieces and handle online donations. I can pay you." Pride reared up immediately. "Owen, you don't have to." "I'm not doing anything except hiring a designer I already know is talented. But if it makes you feel better, we can call it a trade. You build the website, I'll help with whatever you need. Fair exchange, professional arrangement." There was something in his phrasing, the careful way he framed it as mutual benefit rather than charity, that made it possible. She needed the money, she needed help, and more than either of those, she needed to feel like less of a disaster. "Why are you doing this?" Owen was quiet for a moment, his scarred eyebrow drawing down slightly. "My sister got pregnant when she was 17. The father's family paid her to leave town, convinced her she couldn't handle it alone. She gave the baby up for adoption and regretted it every day until she died in a car accident at 25. His voice stayed level, but she could hear the old pain underneath. "I wished someone helped her, someone who wasn't trying to make her disappear or make decisions for her, just someone who showed up. I'm sorry about your sister." "Me too." He met her eyes. "Let me show up, Nora. No strings, no expectations, just neighbors helping neighbors." She wanted to refuse, wanted to prove she could handle everything alone, because that's what she'd always done, what she'd built her entire identity around. But sitting in her cold apartment, pregnant and broke, and more scared than she'd ever been, Independence felt less like strength and more like stubbornness. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." The knock on her door 4 days later was sharp, authoritative, nothing like Owen's casual rap. Nora looked through the peephole and felt her stomach drop. Preston stood in the hallway in a pristine navy suit, and behind him, looking deeply uncomfortable in carpenter's clothes, was a man she didn't recognize, holding a leather folder. She opened the door but didn't invite them in. "Nora." Preston's smile was the one he used in restaurants, charming and empty. "This is David Chen, my attorney. We'd like to discuss an arrangement. I don't want your money. Please, just hear us out." Preston gestured to the folder his lawyer held. "We've drafted something generous. Monthly payments, medical expenses covered, education fund established. All we need is your signature on a non-disclosure agreement. You want me to sign away any claim to you? I want to make sure you and the baby are taken care of while protecting both our interests." He was using his reasonable voice, the one that made her feel like she was being irrational. "This is a significant amount of money, Nora, more than you'd see from any custody arrangement. You'd never have to worry about. I think you should leave." The voice came from behind her. Owen stood in his doorway, a screwdriver still in his hand from whatever project he'd been working on. He looked calm, almost casual, but there was something in his posture that suggested coiled readiness. Preston's eyes narrowed slightly. "This is a private conversation. Doesn't sound very private when I can hear it through my door." Owen moved into the hallway, placing himself subtly between Preston and Nora. "Sounds like the lady asked you to leave." "And you are?" "Owen Fletcher, 3B. He crossed his arms, the screwdriver still visible. "Nora, you okay?" She should have been annoyed at the intervention, at the implication she needed protecting. Instead, she felt steadied by his presence, by the fact that someone was standing with her rather than against her. Preston's lawyer cleared his throat. "Mr. Alcott, perhaps we should—" "Who are you to her?" Preston interrupted, studying Owen with new attention. "Boyfriend? New development?" Owen's hand came to rest on Nora's lower back, light but unmistakably there. "Let's just say I'm invested in making sure she's treated right." Something shifted in Preston's expression. Not quite relief, but close. "I see. Well, that simplifies things." He straightened his already straight tie. "The offer stands, Nora. My lawyer will leave his card. When you're thinking more clearly, we can discuss this like adults." "I'm thinking perfectly clearly," she said. "The answer is no." Preston's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. "Your choice. David, let's go." They watched the two men descend the stairs, Preston's expensive shoes echoing on the old wood. Only when the front door closed, Owen's hand dropped from her back. "Sorry if I overstepped," he said quietly. "I heard him in the hallway and thought, thank you." She meant it. "He looked familiar to you. Do you know him?" Owen's expression darkened slightly. "After he left the other day, I looked him up. Preston Alcott, as in the Alcott family. They own about half the commercial real estate in the city, sit on hospital boards, donate wings to universities." "You're joking." "I wish I was." He leaned against the doorframe. His engagement to the governor's daughter, that's not just personal, that's political dynasty building. And guys like that, families like that, they don't like complications. The full weight of it settled over her. She wasn't just dealing with a cowardly ex-boyfriend. She was dealing with money and power and people who could probably make her life very difficult if they wanted to. "Hey," Owen's voice pulled her back. "You're not alone in this. Whatever they throw at you, you've got backup." Before she could respond, her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Miss Winters?" The voice was female, cold, polished. "This is Vivian Alcott, Preston's mother. I believe we need to have a conversation about your situation. Would you be available to visit the estate tomorrow afternoon? I think you'll find I'm far more reasonable than my son." The voice didn't sound reasonable. It sounded like barely concealed threat wrapped in upper-class diction. I don't think I insist. Shall we say 2 o'clock? A car will collect you. It wasn't a question. The line went dead. Nora stared at her phone. Owen raised an eyebrow in question. Preston's mother wants to meet. At their estate. Tomorrow. Alone? The word hung heavy. Alone? Walking into the territory of people who had resources she couldn't imagine, power she couldn't fight. Alone. Facing down a woman who'd raised someone capable of abandoning his own child without a second thought. Then don't go alone, Owen said simply. Nora barely slept. She lay in the darkness of her apartment, the space heater humming in the corner, and tried to imagine what tomorrow would bring. Every scenario her mind conjured ended badly. Vivian Alcott didn't invite people to her estate for friendly conversations. Women like that didn't waste time on problems they couldn't solve with money or influence. And Nora was very clearly a problem. At 6 in the morning, she gave up on sleep and made tea she couldn't taste. By 7, Owen was knocking with a bag of fresh bagels and the kind of steady presence that made breathing feel possible again. Eat, he said, setting the bag on her tiny kitchen counter. I can't. Baby needs you to. He said it gently, without judgment, and somehow that made it easier to force down half a bagel. By 1:30, they were waiting on the sidewalk outside her building when a black town car pulled up, so pristine it looked like it had never seen actual city streets. The driver, stone-faced in a pressed uniform, opened the rear door without a word. Owen's hand found hers. Still time to tell them no. She wanted to. Every instinct screamed to run back upstairs and hide. But she'd spent 5 years in the city refusing to back down, refusing to go home defeated, and she wasn't about to start now just because the opponent had money. Let's get this over with. The drive took 40 minutes, the city gradually falling away into suburbs, and then into the kind of landscape where properties were measured in acres rather than square feet. The Alcott estate announced itself with iron gates and a driveway lined with trees that probably cost more than her annual income. The house, when it finally came into view, wasn't a house at all. It was a statement rendered in stone and glass, the kind of place that appeared in architecture magazines under headlines about old money and new taste. Owen let out a low whistle. Well, this is something. The driver led them not to the main entrance, but to a side door, a subtle insult Nora clocked immediately. They were guided through hallways decorated with art she recognized from textbooks, past rooms bigger than her entire apartment, until they reached what could only be called a sitting room. Everything was cream and gold, beautiful and cold, like a museum where people forgot to live. Vivian Alcott sat in a high-backed chair that might as well have been a throne. She was 58, but looked ageless in the way that required professional intervention. Her platinum hair cut in a severe bob that probably cost what Nora paid in rent. Her eyes, the same ice blue as Preston's, tracked them as they entered. Miss Winters. She didn't stand. And guest? Owen Fletcher, I'm her husband. The lie came out smooth and easy, and Nora barely managed not to react. Anything that concerns Nora concerns me. Vivian's expression didn't change, but something sharpened in her gaze. How modern. Please sit. They sat on a sofa that was more decorative than comfortable. A woman in uniform appeared with tea service, poured, and vanished like a ghost. Let me be direct, Vivian said, stirring her tea with mechanical precision. My son made a mistake, an unfortunate, regrettable mistake. But mistakes can be managed with the proper resources and discretion. I'm not a mistake, Nora said quietly, and neither is this baby. Of course not, dear. Poor choice of words. What I mean is that this situation needn't become complicated. Preston's attorney drafted an agreement. I understand you refused it. I'd like to offer something more comprehensive. She slid a leather folder across the coffee table. Owen picked it up before Nora could, flipping through pages with careful attention. This is double what Preston offered, he said neutrally. Monthly payments through the child's 18th birthday, medical expenses, private education, college fund, all managed through a third party, completely anonymous. Vivian sipped her tea. In exchange, Miss Winters signs a non-disclosure agreement, relocates to a city of her choosing, at least 200 miles from here, and agrees to a closed adoption with a family of our selection. The room went very still. "You want me to give up my baby?" Nora's voice came out steadier than she felt. "I want to offer you an opportunity for a fresh start, free from the burden of single motherhood and financial struggle. You're a young woman with your whole life ahead of you. This money could set you up properly, let you pursue your career without the anchor of—" "My child isn't an anchor." Nora stood, Owen rising with her. "And I'm not leaving. I'm not signing away my baby. I'm not disappearing because it's convenient for your family." Vivian's pleasant mask slipped, just slightly. "Miss Winters, I don't think you understand the position you're in. My family has considerable resources and considerable reach. If you choose to make this difficult, we can make your life exceedingly challenging. Job prospects, housing, professional reputation, these things can be fragile." "Are you threatening her?" Owen's voice stayed level, but there was steel underneath. "I'm offering clarity. The Alcott name means something in this city. We protect that name." Vivian stood now, her small frame somehow commanding the large room. "But I'm not unreasonable. If Miss Winters insists on keeping the child, if she insists on steading, then we require certain assurances." "What kind of assurances?" Nora asked. "Stability, a proper home environment, steady income, preferably a support system that demonstrates you're not simply trying to trap my son into an obligation." Her eyes moved between them. "If you can prove you're genuinely established in a stable relationship, making responsible choices, then we can discuss a different arrangement. Financial support through third-party channels, but Preston maintains no legal connection, no public acknowledgement. You want proof I won't be a problem? I want proof you can provide a good life for this child without using it as leverage against my family." Vivian returned to her chair, the queen back on her throne. "Bring me evidence of stability, then we'll talk." The car ride back was silent for the first 10 miles. Nora stared out the window, watching the manicured estates give way to normal neighborhoods, trying to process what had just happened. "She's terrified," Owen said finally. "She threatened me." "Because she's terrified. Preston's engagement, his family's reputation, all of it is hanging on him being perfect. You're proof he's not." He shifted to face her. "But she gave us an opening. Stability, support system, that's something we can show her." "Owen, I can't ask you to marry me." The car swerved slightly as even the driver reacted. Nora turned to stare at him. "What? Marry me," he repeated, completely serious. "Not for real. Paper marriage. It gives you legal protection, shows the Alcotts you have support, satisfies their stability requirement. No romantic obligation, no strings. Just neighbors helping neighbors." "That's insane." "That's practical." He leaned forward, earnest. "Look, you need protection from them. You need proof you're not alone. This gives you both. And honestly, it protects me too. If they decide to come after you legally, being your husband means I can't be compelled to testify against you. You've thought about this." "I've been thinking about nothing else since that phone call yesterday." His gray-blue eyes held hers. "I know it sounds crazy, but crazy seems to be where we're living right now. And I told you, I'm not going anywhere. This just makes it official." "For how long?" "As long as you need. A year, 2 years, until the baby's older and the Alcotts lose interest. However long it takes." He reached across the seat, not quite touching her hand, but close. "I'm offering, Nora. No pressure, but I'm offering." She should have said no. Should have found another way, a saner way, a way that didn't involve a fake marriage to a man she barely knew. But she was pregnant and broke and facing down a family that could crush her without breaking stride. And Owen was offering her a life raft. "Why would you do this?" "Because you need help, and I'm here. Because my sister needed help, and no one showed up. Because it's the right thing to do." He paused. "And, for what it's worth, it wouldn't be a hardship. Being your husband, even just on paper. Something warm moved through her chest, dangerous and entirely inappropriate given the circumstances. I need to think about it. Of course, take your time. He settled back in his seat, giving her space. Just know the offer's open, whenever you're ready. That night, Nora stood in her apartment staring at the wall she shared with Owen's place. She could hear him moving around, the soft sounds of his evening routine. Her hand rose to knock on his door a dozen times, but each time she stopped, paralyzed by the enormity of what he was offering and what it might mean. On the other side of the wall, Owen sat at his kitchen table, phone in hand, staring at her contact information. He'd told himself this was about helping, about doing for her what no one had done for his sister. But that wasn't quite true, not entirely. Because somewhere between the stairwell and the soup and standing up to Preston, he'd started to care about Nora Winters in a way that had nothing to do with obligation. He set the phone down. She needed to make this choice freely, without pressure. He could wait. He was good at waiting. His phone buzzed. A text from Nora. Yes. Just one word, but it changed everything. 1 week later, Nora stood in front of the county courthouse in a thrift store dress the color of winter sky and tried to convince herself this was real. The building was all bureaucratic gray stone, people streaming in and out with paperwork and purposes, none of them getting married to their neighbor as a strategic defense against billionaire in-laws. Owen appeared beside her in a button-down shirt that pulled slightly across his shoulders, borrowed from a teacher friend who was broader in the chest, his dark hair still damp from a shower. "You look terrified," he observed. "I am terrified." "Me too." He offered his arm. "Want to be terrified together?" Jamie Chen waited for them inside, vibrating with barely contained energy in her scrubs, having taken an early lunch break from her nursing shift to serve as witness. She pulled Nora into a crushing hug that smelled like hospital antiseptic and drugstore perfume. "This is the most insane thing you've ever done. I'm so proud of you." "It's fake, Jamie." "Sure it is." Jamie's expression suggested she saw right through that particular lie, but she just smiled and adjusted the small bouquet of grocery store flowers she'd brought. "Come on, Mrs. Fletcher, let's make this legal." The ceremony took 12 minutes. A clerk with kind eyes and reading glasses on a chain led them through vows that felt both absurdly simple and impossibly weighty. Nora repeated words about honor and cherish and heard her voice shake on "as long as we both shall live," because even though this was temporary, even though this was strategy, the words still meant something. Owen's hand was steady when he slid the simple silver band onto her finger, a ring they'd picked out together from a vintage shop, $75 that he'd insisted on paying. When it was her turn, his hand was warm in hers, calloused from woodworking, and she noticed he was trembling too. "I do," he said, looking directly at her, and something in his voice made her forget this was pretend. "I do," she echoed, and meant it more than she should have. The clerk pronounced them married. Owen cupped her face with both hands, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen, and kissed her with careful gentleness. It was brief, appropriate, nothing like the kiss of someone actually in love, but her heart stuttered anyway. Jamie took photos on her phone, the flash too bright in the fluorescent-lit office, capturing Nora's stunned expression and Owen's soft smile, and the way his hand never left the small of her back. "Congratulations," the clerk said, handing them the marriage certificate with genuine warmth. "I hope you'll be very happy together." "Thank you," Owen said, and tucked the document carefully into his jacket pocket like it was precious. Outside, December wind cut through Nora's thin coat. Owen immediately shrugged out of his jacket and draped it over her shoulders, leaving himself in just the borrowed shirt. "You'll freeze," she protested. "I'll live." He pulled the jacket tighter around her. "Come on, wife, let's get you home." Wife, the word hung between them, strange and intimate and terrifying. Moving Nora's belongings from 3C to 3B took less time than it should have. 5 years in the city, and everything she owned fit into a dozen boxes and 3 suitcases. Owen's apartment was larger, a true one-bedroom instead of her studio, with actual separation between living and sleeping spaces, and windows that let in real light. They'd agreed she'd take the bedroom, he'd take the couch. But standing in his space, surrounded by her boxes, felt like crossing a line they couldn't uncross. "I can take the couch," she offered for the third time. "You're pregnant, you get the bed, non-negotiable." He was already unpacking her books, arranging them on his shelf between his own worn paperbacks and teacher editions. "Besides, I fall asleep grading papers out here half the time anyway." They fell into a rhythm over the following days, awkward at first and then increasingly natural. Owen made coffee in the morning, decaf for her without being asked, and left it on the counter if he had early classroom prep. Nora would wake to find her prenatal vitamins set out beside the mug, a silent reminder that someone was paying attention. She'd reorganize his chaotic grading system, creating a filing method that actually made sense, and leave dinner warming in the oven when he worked late. He built her a proper desk by the window, measuring twice and cutting precisely, his hands confident with tools in a way that made her stomach flip inappropriately. She designed website mock-ups for his students' art show and pretended not to notice how he'd pause behind her chair to watch her work, his breath warm on her neck. "You're really talented," he said one evening, studying a particularly complex layout she'd created. "It's just a school fundraiser site. It's beautiful. They're going to love it." He pointed to a detail in the corner. "This part, the way you incorporated actual student sketches into the border design, that's thoughtful. That's seeing them." The praise shouldn't have mattered so much, but it did. 3 weeks into the marriage, Nora had her first prenatal appointment. Owen drove, his old sedan rattling over potholes, talk radio playing softly. In the waiting room, he held her hand while she filled out paperwork that asked about the father's medical history, information she didn't have, and Preston certainly wouldn't provide. "Just put unknown," Owen said. "It's fine." The nurse called them back, assumed Owen was the father, and neither of them corrected her. It felt easier than explaining, less complicated than the truth. In the examination room, with its generic watercolor prints and smell of sanitizer, the ultrasound technician squirted cold gel on Nora's barely there bump. "Let's see what we've got here," the technician said cheerfully, moving the wand across Nora's skin. The heartbeat filled the room, fast and strong, a galloping rhythm that sounded like hope and terror combined. Nora's breath caught, Owen's hand tightened around hers. "There's your baby," the technician said, pointing to a blob on the screen that barely looked human but somehow was everything. Measuring right at 12 weeks, nice strong heartbeat. Owen was crying. Nora turned to look at him and found tears tracking down his face, his expression full of wonder and something that looked dangerously close to love. "You okay?" she whispered. "Yeah." His voice cracked. "Yeah, I'm perfect." In the car afterward, they sat in silence for a long moment. "I know I'm not the father," Owen said finally. "I know this isn't real in the way that matters, but I'd like to be involved, if you want. Not just legally, but actually. Appointments, decisions, middle-of-the-night ice cream runs, all of it. Owen, you don't have to. I want to." He turned to face her, intensity in those gray-blue eyes. "I want to be there for this, for you, for them, if you'll let me." She should have said no, should have maintained boundaries, kept this arrangement purely practical. But she was 3 months pregnant and more scared than she'd ever admit, and the idea of not doing this alone made her want to cry with relief. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, please." His smile could have powered the whole city. The following week, Owen's school hosted the student art show. Nora had designed shirts for the event, simple but striking, and watching Owen move through the crowd in one made something warm bloom in her chest. He was in his element here, encouraging shy students, pointing out details to parents, his pride in these kids obvious and genuine. A girl of about 15, all braces and nervous energy, approached Nora. "Are you Mr. Fletcher's wife?" The words still felt strange. "I am. He talks about you all the time, says you're a brilliant designer." The girl held out a sketchbook. "I want to do graphic design too. Could you maybe look at my stuff? Mr. F said you might." Nora spent the next hour reviewing portfolios, offering advice, watching these kids light up when someone took their work seriously. Owen kept glancing over, his expression soft, and she realized this was his world. This was who he was when no one was performing or posing, just genuine care, freely given. "You're good with them," he said later as they cleaned up after the event. "They're talented. They just need someone to see it." "Like someone saw you?" He folded a table, muscles flexing under his shirt in a way she definitely didn't notice. "No one saw me. I taught myself everything from YouTube." "I see you," he said simply, like it was obvious. "I've been seeing you since you moved in. You work harder than anyone I know. You don't quit, even when you should. You're stubborn and proud, and so scared of needing anyone that you'd rather drown than ask for a life raft." He set down the table. "But you're also kind and creative, and you're going to be an amazing mother. And I see all of that." The speech should have felt like too much. Instead, it felt like being known. That night, Nora couldn't sleep. Pregnancy insomnia had started, leaving her restless and uncomfortable at 2 a.m. She padded into the kitchen for water and found Owen at the table, grading papers, still dressed despite the late hour. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Baby's practicing gymnastics." She settled into the chair across from him. "You should be sleeping." "Too much on my mind." He set down his pen. "Want tea?" They ended up talking until sunrise, the kind of rambling conversation that covered everything and nothing. She told him about growing up in Marion, about her parents who still thought she was successfully pursuing her dreams, about the fear that she'd left home for nothing. He told her about his sister, about the guilt he still carried, about choosing teaching because someone needed to be the adult who showed up. "I always wanted kids," he admitted quietly, "but I never found the right person. Started thinking maybe that kind of connection wasn't real, that maybe people just settled for close enough." "What changed your mind?" He looked at her for a long moment. "I'm not sure it has." The air between them shifted, charged with something neither would name. Nora reached across the table, her hand covering his. "Thank you for all of this, for showing up." Owen turned his hand over, lacing their fingers together. "There's nowhere else I'd rather be." They sat like that as dawn broke, married and not married, connected in ways that had nothing to do with paperwork and everything to do with the fragile, terrifying thing growing between them that felt dangerously close to real. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday, cream-colored and heavy, the kind of paper stock that announced money before you even opened it. Nora stood in the building's lobby holding it like it might explode, Vivian Alcott's perfect calligraphy spelling out the names. Mr. and Mrs. Owen Fletcher. The casual cruelty of it, the way it made their arrangement sound real and permanent, settled like ice in her stomach. Owen appeared behind her, back from his morning run, sweaty and breathing hard. "What's that?" She handed it to him without speaking. He read the contents, his expression darkening with each line. "It's not an invitation," he said finally. "It's a summons." The Alcott family requested, which really meant demanded, their presence at Preston's engagement celebration this coming Saturday evening. The note, written in Vivian's razor-sharp hand, made it clear this wasn't optional. They'd married, they'd shown stability, and now the Alcotts wanted their final performance. Proof that the situation was handled, that Nora had moved on with her new husband, that Preston was free to marry the governor's daughter without complications. "We don't have to go," Owen said, though his tone suggested he knew that wasn't true. "If we don't, she'll make things difficult." She was clear about that. Nora pressed her hand to her stomach, now visibly rounded at 4 months. "We show up, we smile, we prove I'm not a threat to their perfect family narrative. Then maybe they leave us alone. I don't like you being in their territory. I don't either, but I like the alternative less." Jamie helped her get ready on Saturday, bringing over a maternity dress she'd borrowed from a friend, deep emerald that made Nora's hazel eyes look more green than gold. The fabric draped carefully over the bump, elegant without drawing attention, and Jamie pinned Nora's hair up with more skill than Nora possessed. "You look beautiful," Jamie said, meeting Nora's eyes in the mirror. "And terrified." "I am terrified. These people could destroy us." "So could a lot of things. Doesn't mean you run." Jamie squeezed her shoulders. "Besides, you're not alone. You've got that man in there who looks at you like you hung the moon, fake marriage or not. It is fake. Sure, honey, that's why you sleep in his shirts and he makes you breakfast every morning and you both look at each other when you think the other isn't watching. Jamie grinned. Completely fake. Before Nora could respond, Owen emerged from the bedroom in a dark suit that fit him better than anything she'd seen him wear. He'd gotten a haircut, tamed the perpetual mess into something almost polished, though his scar and the kind eyes remained unchanged. She started, then stopped, because finishing that sentence felt dangerous. You look, he said quietly. They won't know what hit them. The drive to the Alcott estate felt both too long and too short. Owen kept his hand on her knee, a steady anchor, while winter landscape blurred past the windows. When the gates came into view, Nora's breath shortened. Hey. Owen pulled over before they reached the entrance, turning to face her. We can leave any time. The second you want out, we're gone. I don't care who it offends. Okay. I mean it, Nora. You say the word, I'll carry you out of there if I have to. Something about the fierce protectiveness in his voice steadied her. I know. Thank you. He kissed her forehead, gentle and lingering, and it felt nothing like pretend. The estate blazed with light, every window golden, the driveway lined with expensive cars that probably cost more than Owen made in 5 years. Women in furs and diamonds emerged from town cars, men in custom suits that screamed old money. Nora felt immediately out of place in her borrowed dress and discount shoes, but Owen's hand on her back kept her spine straight. Inside was worse. The entrance hall soared 3 stories, all marble and crystal, flowers arranged in massive displays that must have cost thousands. A string quartet played something classical in the corner, the kind of music that was more status symbol than entertainment. People clustered in groups, their laughter polished, and their small talk an art form Nora had never learned. Nora, Owen. Vivian materialized like a beautiful ghost, her ice blue gown matching her eyes, diamonds at her throat catching light. How lovely you could make it. Mrs. Alcott, Owen said evenly. Thank you for the invitation. Yes, well, I thought it important we demonstrate there are no hard feelings, that everyone has moved forward appropriately. Her smile was razor sharp. Come, let me introduce you to some friends. She led them through the crowd to a cluster of women who looked like they'd been carved from the same expensive marble as the house. Each wore a fortune in jewelry, each had that ageless quality that spoke of excellent surgeons, and each studied Nora like she was a specimen under glass. This is Nora Fletcher and her husband Owen. They're friends of the family, Vivian said, the lie smooth and practiced. Nora, Owen, this is Catherine Whitmore, the mother of the bride-to-be, and several dear friends. The interrogation began immediately, wrapped in politeness but vicious underneath. How did you two meet? Catherine asked, her tone suggesting she already knew and found it wanting. We're neighbors, Owen said easily. I had the good fortune of living next door to the most interesting woman in the building. Quite a quick engagement, wasn't it? Another woman, dripping in pearls, smiled like a shark. Some might say suspiciously quick. Nora felt Owen tense beside her. When you know, she said. Why wait? And what do you do, dear? Catherine again, eyes flickering to Nora's stomach and away. I'm a graphic designer, freelance. How modern. And Owen? I teach high school art. He said it with quiet pride, no apology for making a fraction of what these people spent on wine. A teacher. How noble. The word noble sounded like an insult. That must be quite an adjustment for you, Nora, after, she paused delicately, well, after knowing Preston. The implication hung poisonous in the air, that Nora had been after money, had traded up or down, depending on how you measured, that this marriage was suspect. Actually, Nora said clearly, it's not an adjustment at all. Owen shows up. That's not something I was used to. The women's expressions flickered with something between surprise and disdain. Vivian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Perhaps you'd like to see the rest of the house," Vivian said, her tone suggesting this wasn't optional. "Owen, the men are gathering in the study for cigars and business talk. I'm sure you'd find it educational." It was a dismissal and a separation tactic. Owen looked at Nora, a silent question. She nodded slightly. He couldn't protect her from everything, and refusing would make things worse. "I'll find you soon," he said quietly, his hand squeezing hers before letting go. Watching him walk away felt like losing her only ally in enemy territory. Vivian led Nora through increasingly opulent rooms, pointing out art and antiques with the air of someone cataloging weapons in an arsenal. The other women followed like a pack, their heels clicking on marble, their whispers sharp. They ended up in a dining room that could seat 40, the table already set with china so delicate it looked like it would shatter if you breathed on it wrong. "This is where we'll have the rehearsal dinner," Vivian said. "Intimate, just 80 or so close family and friends." 80 people was intimate in this world. Nora felt dizzy with the excess of it. "Preston seems happy," one of the women offered. "Caroline is perfect for him. Accomplished, connected, appropriate." The word appropriate landed like a slap. Everything Nora wasn't. "I'm sure they'll be very happy together," Nora said, because what else could she say? "It's good that you've moved on as well," Catherine said, studying Nora with cold assessment. "Though I must say, the timing of your marriage, the timing of your—" she gestured vaguely at Nora's stomach. "It does raise questions." "Are you asking me something directly, Mrs. Whitmore?" The room went silent. You didn't challenge these women. You didn't push back. "I'm simply noting," Catherine said icily, "that the dates seem remarkably convenient." "My marriage is none of your business," Nora said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Neither is my pregnancy. Owen and I are happy. That's all that matters." "Happiness," Vivian laughed, sharp and cold. "How charmingly naive." "Let me tell you about happiness, dear. Happiness is security, stability, knowing your place and accepting it gracefully. And what place is that? Away from my son, away from this family. We've been generous, providing financial support through appropriate channels, but don't mistake generosity for weakness." Vivian stepped closer, her perfume expensive and suffocating. "You signed no papers, accepted no formal agreements. That money can disappear as easily as it appeared. So can job prospects, housing references, professional opportunities. We can make your life very difficult if you become a problem. I'm not trying to be a problem. I just want to raise my child in peace." "Then keep your peace far from us." Vivian's smile was glacial. "Smile for the cameras tonight, play the happy newlywed, and then fade into whatever small life you've built. That's the deal." Nora's hands clenched into fists, but before she could respond, Owen appeared in the doorway. His expression was controlled, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "There you are," he said, moving to her side immediately. "They're starting toasts in the main room. Vivian, I believe they're looking for you." It was a polite extraction, perfectly executed. Vivian's eyes narrowed, but she couldn't refuse without causing a scene. "Of course. Ladies, shall we?" The main ballroom glittered with crystal and old money, chandeliers dripping light onto a crowd of people who looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine spread on wealth and privilege. Owen kept his hand firmly on Nora's back as they navigated through the crush of designer gowns and custom suits, his body angled protectively between her and the worst of the crowd. "What did she say to you?" he asked quietly. "Nothing I didn't expect." Nora's voice was steadier than she felt. "Threats wrapped in politeness, the usual." His jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Preston appeared at the front of the room, beside a woman who could only be Caroline Whitmore. She was lovely in that effortless way that came from good breeding and better stylists, her blonde hair swept up elegantly, her smile warm and genuine as she looked at Preston. She had no idea, Nora realized with a sick lurch. No idea that her fiancé had abandoned a pregnant woman months ago. No idea that this entire celebration was built on lies. Preston's eyes found Nora in the crowd. Guilt flashed across his face before he smoothed it away, raised his champagne glass, and began his speech about love and partnership and building a future together. The irony was suffocating. Vivian took the microphone next, her voice carrying across the room with practiced ease. Preston and Caroline represent everything our families stand for: integrity, commitment, the kind of love built on proper foundations, not fleeting passion or unfortunate complications. The words were meant for the room, but Vivian's eyes landed on Nora for just a moment, long enough to make the message clear. True character, Vivian continued, reveals itself in how we handle life's challenges, in choosing the right path over the easy one, in knowing what matters and protecting it at all costs. Applause rippled through the crowd. Nora felt sick. "I need air," she whispered to Owen. He didn't question it, just guided her through the crowd toward the terrace doors. But they only made it halfway before one of the society women, 3 glasses deep in champagne, blocked their path. "You're the one Preston dated before Caroline, aren't you?" The woman's voice carried, heads turning their direction. "I remember hearing about you. Some girl from nowhere who thought she could." "Excuse us," Owen said firmly, trying to move around her. "No wonder he moved on," the woman continued, emboldened by alcohol and audience. "I mean, look at you, playing dress-up in borrowed clothes, pretending to belong. At least you found someone on your level, a teacher," she laughed. "How perfectly modest." The conversations around them died. Preston went pale. Vivian's expression turned glacial, furious that her careful control was slipping. Nora felt the weight of every eye in the room, felt the judgment and the disdain, and the barely concealed glee at watching someone be publicly humiliated. Her face burned, her throat closed. She wanted to disappear, to run, to be anywhere but here. Owen stepped forward, placing himself between Nora and the drunk woman, his voice calm but carrying across the now silent room. "You want to talk about modest? Let's talk about it." He looked around at the crowd, meeting eyes without flinching. "My wife is a brilliant designer who built a career from nothing. She works harder than anyone I've ever met. She's kind, she's creative, and she has more integrity in her little finger than most people in this room combined." "Owen," Nora whispered, but he wasn't done. "You want to judge her for not being born into the right family, for wearing borrowed clothes, for marrying a teacher instead of someone with a trust fund?" His voice never rose, but the intensity behind it made people shift uncomfortably. "That says a lot more about you than it does about her." He turned, finding Preston in the crowd. "And you." The disappointment in Owen's voice was devastating. "You left her alone and terrified because it wasn't convenient, because protecting your reputation mattered more than doing the right thing. You want to talk about character? Character is showing up. Character is facing consequences. Character is not abandoning your responsibilities because they're uncomfortable." Preston's face drained of color. Caroline looked between them, confusion dawning into realization. "What is he talking about?" Caroline asked quietly. Vivian moved quickly, her hand on Caroline's arm. "Nothing, dear, just—" "Preston?" Caroline's voice was stronger now. "What is he talking about?" The silence was crushing. Preston opened his mouth, closed it, looked desperately at his mother. Owen turned back to Nora, his voice softening. "You are brave, you are strong, and I am proud to stand with you. These people," he gestured to the room, "they're not worth your tears, they're not worth your time, and they're sure as hell not worth feeling ashamed." Then he cupped her face in both hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling, and looked at her like she was the only person in the world that mattered. "Can I kiss you?" he whispered. She nodded, beyond words, beyond thought. Owen kissed her like he meant it. Not the careful brush of lips from their courthouse ceremony, not a performance for an audience. This was real and desperate and claiming. His hands cradled her face like she was precious, his mouth moving against hers with a gentleness that made her knees weak. She fisted her hands in his jacket, pulling him closer, feeling the baby kick between them as if in agreement. The world narrowed to just this. His warmth, his taste, the way he held her like she might break, but kissed her like she was strong enough to handle anything. When they finally broke apart, foreheads resting together, she could feel his heart racing against her chest. "That wasn't fake," he breathed. "I know," she whispered back. The room erupted in chaos. Caroline was demanding answers, her voice rising with each question. Vivian was trying to control the situation, her perfect composure cracking. Guests were whispering furiously, phones appearing as people recorded what was rapidly becoming the scandal of the season. Security appeared, 2 large men in suits, and Vivian's voice cut through the noise. "I think it's time for the Fletchers to leave." "Gladly," Owen said, his hand finding Nora's. "We're done here anyway." They walked out through the crowd, heads high, hand in hand. Behind them, Nora could hear Caroline's voice rising, Preston's desperate attempts at explanation, Vivian's barely controlled fury. None of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was Owen's fingers laced through hers and the way he'd stood up for her when no one else ever had. In the car, neither of them spoke for miles. Owen's hands gripped the steering wheel tight enough that his knuckles went white, his jaw clenched with residual anger. Nora stared out the window, trying to process what had just happened. "I'm sorry," Owen said finally. "I shouldn't have done that. I just lost my speech, made everything worse." "You defended me," her voice cracked. "No one's ever done that before. Nora, you stood in front of all those people and you chose me. You didn't care about their money or their connections or what it might cost you. You just stood there and chose me." She was crying again, but this time from something that felt dangerously close to joy. Why? He pulled the car over, throwing it into park on the side of the dark road. When he turned to her, his eyes were bright with emotion. "Because you deserve to be chosen. Because watching them tear you down made me want to burn that whole place to the ground. Because," he stopped, struggling with words, "because that kiss wasn't fake for me. None of this has been fake. Not for a long time. Owen, we agreed this was temporary. We agreed—" "I know what we agreed. I know this started a strategy. But somewhere between the courthouse and the ultrasound and making you tea at 2 in the morning, it became real." He reached for her hand, hesitant. "I'm in love with you, Nora. Not the situation, not the idea of you. You. Your stubborn pride and your terrible coffee, and the way you reorganize my grading system when you think I'm not looking. The way you cry at diaper commercials and steal my hoodies and talk to the baby when you think no one's listening. You're not supposed to fall in love with me," she whispered. "I know. I tried not to. I swear I tried." His thumb stroked across her knuckles. "But I failed spectacularly." She should have pulled away, should have reminded him this was complicated, that she was pregnant with another man's child, that her life was a disaster he didn't deserve to be pulled into. But she was tired of should, tired of protecting herself, tired of pretending this marriage felt anything but real. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Me too." Preston was easy. He was distant and unavailable, and I never had to risk actually getting hurt because he was never really there. She looked at Owen through tears. "You're terrifying because you're here. You show up. And if I let myself love you and you leave, I'm not leaving." He said it with absolute certainty. "I'm not Preston. I'm not your father who you have to lie to about how you're doing. I'm not anyone who's ever let you down. I'm here, Nora. I'm not going anywhere. You can't promise that. Watch me." He leaned across the center console, his hand cupping her face. I, Owen Fletcher, promise to show up. Every day, every crisis, every 2 a.m. panic attack and every midnight ice cream craving, every ultrasound and every moment you need someone in your corner. I promise to see you, all of you, and choose you anyway. That's not fake. That's forever, if you'll have me. She kissed him then, desperate and messy and real, tasting salt from her tears and something sweet underneath. His hand slid to the back of her neck, holding her close, and she felt the baby kick between them like approval. When they finally made it back to the apartment, Owen carried her over the threshold, even though they'd been married for weeks, even though she protested she was too heavy now, even though it was ridiculous. Humor me, he said, setting her down gently inside. I want to do this right. This is right, she said, pulling him down for another kiss. This is the most right thing I've ever done. Nora woke alone. The space beside her in bed was cold, the sheets undisturbed, and for a moment she thought last night had been a dream. But her lips were still tender from kissing, her heart still racing from confessions made in the dark, and the apartment was silent in a way that felt wrong. She found Owen's note on the kitchen counter, his handwriting rushed. Had to go in early, department meeting. Coffee's ready, I'll see you tonight. We should talk. We should talk. 4 words that had never meant anything good. Nora's stomach dropped. Nausea that had nothing to do with pregnancy washing over her. Last night, in the heat of the moment, after the confrontation and the kiss and the admission of feelings, everything had felt possible. But morning had a way of making grand gestures look like mistakes. She pressed her hand to her belly, now prominently rounded at 5 months, and felt the baby shift in response. It's just us again, she whispered, like it was always going to be. 2 weeks crawled by, each day heavier than the last. Owen came home late, left early, filled the space between them with polite distance and careful neutrality. He still made her decaf coffee, still left prenatal vitamins on the counter, still asked about her day with genuine interest. But he didn't touch her, didn't look at her the way he had in the car that night. The heat between them had cooled to something safe and terrible. Nora told herself this was better, safer. She threw herself into work, picked up extra clients, designed until her eyes burned. The money from the Alcott settlement had appeared in her account, transferred through some anonymous third party, enough to make her financially stable for the first time in years. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like payment for services rendered, like confirmation that she'd been bought off after all. She moved her things back to 3C, not dramatically, just gradually, a box here and there, until most of her belongings had migrated back across the hall. Owen didn't comment on it, just helped carry the heavier items without being asked, his face carefully blank. Jamie cornered her on a rainy Tuesday evening, appearing at her door with takeout and a look that meant business. "What are you doing?" Jamie demanded, setting food on the counter. "Working, eating, gestating, the usual." "You're running from the best thing that's happened to you." Jamie's eyes were fierce. "That man is in love with you, Nora, actually genuinely in love, and you're hiding in here like he's the problem." "He said we should talk. Past tense feelings, Jamie. He regretted it." "Did you ask him, or did you just assume the worst and bolt?" Jamie crossed her arms. "You do this. Every time things get real, you run. You did it with your family, with your dreams, and now you're doing it with Owen." "I'm protecting myself." "You're sabotaging yourself. There's a difference." Jamie's voice softened. "He looks miserable, Nora. He thinks you want the distance. He thinks he pushed too hard and scared you off." "He should be scared off. I'm a mess. I'm pregnant with another man's baby, broke until recently, living in a fake marriage that got way too complicated. None of that matters to him, but your fear does. And right now, your fear is winning." After Jamie left, Nora sat in the growing darkness of 3C and admitted the truth she'd been avoiding. She loved Owen, completely, terrifyingly, couldn't imagine life without him loved him. And that was exactly why she'd run. Because Preston leaving had hurt. but Owen leaving would destroy her. The knock came 3 days later, formal and unfamiliar. Nora opened the door to find Owen in a button-down shirt she'd never seen, his expression carefully neutral, holding a piece of paper. "Can we talk?" he asked, properly. They went to the coffee shop on the corner, neutral territory, sitting across from each other like strangers. Owen slid the paper across the table. It was covered in his handwriting, the word annulment written and crossed out multiple times, notes scribbled in the margins. "I've been thinking," he started, his voice measured, "about what you need, what's fair, and I think maybe I pushed too hard, made this about my feelings instead of what you wanted." "Owen, let me finish, please." He took a breath. "I meant everything I said that night, every word. But I also meant the promises I made when we got married. This was supposed to help you, not trap you. So if you want out, if you want the annulment, I'll sign whatever you need. I'll still support you and the baby, that doesn't change. But I won't hold you to something you don't want." She stared at the paper, at his handwriting, trying to let her go. And something broke open in her chest. "You think I want out? You moved back to 3C. You barely look at me. You've been pulling away for 2 weeks." His voice cracked slightly. "I thought I was helping, giving you space." "You idiot," she whispered. "I was giving you space. I thought you regretted everything. Your note said we should talk, past tense, like you wanted to take it back." They stared at each other across the coffee shop table, the misunderstanding suddenly painfully clear. "I don't regret anything," Owen said. "I could never regret you." Before Nora could respond, the coffee shop door opened and Preston walked in, stopping short when he saw them. He looked different, diminished somehow, his perfect hair slightly disheveled, circles under his ice blue eyes. "Nora," he said, "I was hoping I defined you. Mrs. Chen in 2A said you'd come this direction." Owen's entire body tensed. "What do you want?" "To talk. To Nora. Alone." Preston's eyes moved to her belly, something complicated crossing his face. "Please." Every instinct screamed to refuse, but curiosity won. "It's fine," she told Owen quietly. "I'll meet you back at the apartment." Owen looked like he wanted to argue, but finally nodded and left, though not before shooting Preston a look that promised consequences if anything happened. Preston sat in Owen's vacated chair, ordered nothing, stared at his hands. "Caroline left me," he said finally, "after the party, after she found out about you and the baby. She said she couldn't marry someone who would abandon their own child." He laughed bitterly. "My mother's furious. The engagement is off, the merger with the Whitmore family is dead, and my father's threatening to cut me off entirely." "I'm sorry," Nora said, and meant it despite everything. "Are you happy?" Preston asked, looking up at her. "With him? With how things turned out?" She thought about Owen's patient kindness, his steady presence, the way he loved her without conditions. "Yes, I am." "He's a better man than me." Preston's voice was hollow. "I've been in therapy, trying to figure out why I run from everything real, why I only know how to perform instead of feel." He reached into his jacket, pulled out an envelope. "This is information about my medical history, family health issues, genetic stuff. For the baby, you should have it." Nora took the envelope, surprised. "Thank you. I also wanted to..." He stopped, started again. "I want to be involved, not co-parenting. I know I gave up that right, but maybe updates, pictures. I want to know my kid, even if it's from a distance, even if I don't deserve it. Preston, I'm not asking to disrupt your life. Owen's going to be the father. I know that. I see how he looks at you, how he stood up for you. He's already more of a dad than I could ever be." Preston's eyes were damp. "But this is my child too, and I don't want them growing up thinking I didn't care. I do care. I'm just really bad at showing it." Nora studied him, this man who'd hurt her so badly, now broken open and trying. "I need to talk to Owen. This isn't just my decision. Of course, I understand." Preston stood, hesitated. For what it's worth, I am sorry. For all of it. You deserved better. I got better, she said simply. After he left, Nora sat with the envelope and her churning thoughts. She should have felt vindicated, watching Preston lose everything he'd valued over her. Instead, she just felt tired and desperate to get home to Owen. She returned to find Owen pacing the hallway outside 3B, his jaw tight with barely controlled emotion. What did he want? To apologize? To be involved peripherally? To give me medical history? She held up the envelope. And to tell me you're going to be this baby's real father. Something in Owen's expression cracked. Nora, I don't want the annulment. The words tumbled out fast, desperate. I don't want space. I don't want to pretend this is fake anymore. I was scared, and I ran, and I'm sorry, but I'm done running. What are you saying? I'm saying I love you. I love how you make terrible puns while grading papers. I love how you cry at ultrasounds and build things with your hands and show up every single time, no exceptions. I love that you chose me when I couldn't choose myself. I love you, Owen Fletcher, and if that offer for forever is still on the table, I'm taking it. Owen crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, lifting her easily despite her belly, spinning her once before setting her down and kissing her breathless. His hands framed her face, his forehead pressed to hers, his smile brighter than she'd ever seen it. Forever, he whispered. You've got me forever. That night, they fell asleep in 3B's bed, her back to his chest, his hand splayed protectively over her belly, where the baby kicked approval. The space between them finally, blessedly closed. For 3 days, everything was perfect. They moved Nora's things back into 3B properly this time, rearranging furniture to make space for both their lives. Owen started building a crib in the corner of the bedroom, measuring twice and cutting carefully, while Nora designed birth announcements she'd never send to the Alcotts. They talked about names, about the future, about how they'd handle Preston's request for updates. They existed in a bubble of tentative happiness, learning how to be honestly together instead of carefully apart. Then, Owen disappeared. Nora woke on the 4th morning to an empty apartment and a note that said only, "Trust me, back soon." His phone went straight to voicemail. Jamie hadn't seen him. His school said he'd called in for a personal day. By noon, Nora was equal parts worried and furious, pacing 3B while the baby kicked in protest at her anxiety. He returned at 2 in the afternoon, paint splattered and exhausted, with sawdust in his hair and a smile that looked almost guilty. "Where have you been?" she demanded. "I need to show you something." He held out his hand. "Will you come with me?" "Owen, you disappeared for hours. You can't just—" "I know, I'm sorry. I should have explained, but I wanted it to be a surprise." His eyes were bright with something that looked like barely contained excitement. "Please, trust me." Against her better judgment, she took his hand. He drove them across the city to a neighborhood she knew well, the area around their apartment building where actual people lived instead of old money dynasties. He pulled up in front of a corner storefront that had been empty for months, windows papered over, a for lease sign fading in the window. "What are we doing here?" Nora asked. Owen didn't answer, just led her to the door and produced a key that shouldn't have existed. Inside, the space was raw and unfinished, but beautiful. Exposed brick walls, original hardwood floors, huge windows that let in streams of afternoon light. The ground floor was open and spacious, perfect for retail. Stairs in the back led up to what had to be a second floor. "Owen, what is this?" He pulled off the paper covering one window, revealing the street outside, people walking past, the coffee shop on the corner where they'd almost lost each other, the bus stop where neighborhood kids gathered after school. "I've been looking at properties for weeks," he said quietly, "since before the engagement party, actually. I had some money saved, inheritance from my grandparents I've been sitting on because I didn't know what to use it for. And then I heard you talking to Jamie one night about your dream, opening a children's bookstore with an illustration studio upstairs. You said it like it was impossible, like it was just a fantasy." Nora's breath caught. "Owen, Ground floor is perfect for a bookstore. Big windows, good foot traffic, right in our neighborhood where kids actually need a place like this. Second floor. He led her up the stairs to a sprawling open space with north-facing windows and good bones. Studio space. Room for drafting tables, storage for supplies, natural light for design work. And third floor? Another flight of stairs, narrower but sturdy, led to a small apartment. Rough but livable, with enough space for a bedroom, kitchen, living area. Apartment for us, all of us. She walked through the empty space, her hand trailing along the brick, trying to process what he was saying. The scale of it, the impossibility. You bought this? I made an offer 2 weeks ago. It was accepted while we were busy not talking to each other. I've been here the last 3 days, doing initial cleanup, getting inspections scheduled, meeting with contractors. He ran his hand through his hair, suddenly uncertain. I know I should have asked. I know this is huge and maybe overstepping, but I wanted to give you something that was yours. Not mine, not Preston's money, not anyone else's. Your dream, made real. We could run the bookstore together. I could write the stories, you could illustrate them. We could create something that matters in our community. This must have cost. Every penny I had saved, yeah. And we'll need to work our asses off to make it profitable. It's not going to be easy, but I don't want easy. He turned to face her fully, his gray-blue eyes intense. I don't want to give you my world, Nora. I want to help you build yours. This, us, the baby, the bookstore. I want to build something real that's ours, not borrowed or fake or temporary. I want permanent. I want messy and complicated and absolutely real. Tears were streaming down her face. You're insane. Probably. He smiled, that soft, genuine smile that had made her fall in love with him. But I'm your kind of insane. If you want me. She crossed to him, had to reach up because of her belly, and pulled him down into a kiss that tasted like salt and promise and coming home. His arms came around her carefully, mindfully of the baby between them, holding her like she was everything. I want you, she whispered against his mouth. I want this. I want all of it. Yeah? There's one condition, though. She pulled back enough to look at him seriously. I'm paying half the mortgage. We're partners, Owen, equal in everything. This isn't you rescuing me. This is us building something together. His smile could have lit the whole city. Partners, I can work with that. She looked around the raw space, already seeing it transformed. Children's books lining the walls, reading nooks with comfortable cushions, art from Owen's students displayed and for sale, storytime circles on Saturday mornings. Her studio upstairs, finally having room to spread out, Owen writing at the desk by the window while she illustrated his words. The apartment above, small but theirs, raising their baby in a place that smelled like books and possibilities. We should get married again, she said suddenly. We're already married. I mean for real this time. Not strategy, not paperwork. A real ceremony where we say real vows. Vows and mean every word. She laced her fingers through his. I want to marry you, Owen Fletcher. Intentionally, completely, forever. Are you proposing to me? He was grinning now, joy radiating from every part of him. I am. Is that a problem? Not even a little bit. He kissed her again, then dropped to his knees in front of her, his hands on her belly, his face level with where their baby grew. Hey in there, your mom just proposed to me. I said yes, in case you were wondering. We're going to give you the weirdest origin story, but I promise it ends happy. The baby kicked, hard enough that Owen felt it against his palms. He laughed, the sound pure and perfect, and Nora memorized this moment. This man on his knees in an empty storefront, talking to her baby like it was already his, surrounded by the framework of dreams becoming real. 2 years later, Nora stood behind the counter of Fletcher & Fletcher books, ringing up a purchase for a regular customer while keeping one eye on the reading circle in the corner where Owen was doing voices for a picture book they'd created together. Their daughter Lily, now 18 months old, with Owen's dark hair and Nora's hazel eyes, sat in Jamie's lap and clapped enthusiastically whenever Owen made the dragon voice. The store was exactly what she'd imagined and better. Local art on the walls, comfortable spaces for kids to explore, a community bulletin board covered in drawings and thank you notes. Upstairs, her studio was full of half-finished illustrations for their third book together. The apartment above that was small and sometimes chaotic, but it was home in a way nowhere else had ever been. Preston sent updates occasionally, brief emails asking how Lily was doing, including photos from his own therapy journey and tentative attempts at becoming someone better. They'd established boundaries that worked. He could know his daughter existed, could see photos, but Owen was dad in every way that mattered. Preston seemed to understand that, seemed almost grateful for it. The door chimed, and Owen looked up from the reading circle, his eyes finding hers across the store like they always did, that smile that was just for her spreading across his face. 2 years, and he still looked at her like she'd hung the moon. 2 years of building this life brick by brick, of midnight feedings and story drafts, of watching their dreams take shape in wood and words, and the weight of their daughter in their arms. "Story time's almost then," Owen called. "Then I'm taking my girls to that new ice cream place. You in?" "Always," she called back, and meant it in every possible way. That evening, after ice cream and bath time and tucking Lily into the crib Owen had built with his own hands, they stood together in the bookstore after closing. Nora was updating the website while Owen reorganized the children's section, and the comfortable silence between them felt like home. "Hey," Owen said, looking up from a display of board books. "Remember when you hired me to build a website for a school art show? That's not how it happened." "Close enough." He crossed to her, pulling her away from the computer and into his arms. "Best professional arrangement I ever made." It stopped being professional pretty quickly. Thank God for that. He kissed the top of her head, swaying slightly like they were dancing to music only they could hear. "Thank you." "For what?" "For trusting me, for staying, for building this with me, for saying yes in that courthouse and meaning it in that storefront and every day since." His hand found hers, their wedding bands catching light. Real ones this time, chosen together, engraved with the date they'd renewed their vows when Lily was 2 months old. "For being my wife. Actually, genuinely, completely. Thank you for showing up," she said simply. Every single time. Through the bookstore windows, the city moved around them. Their neighborhood, their community, their perfectly imperfect life built from nothing but determination and hope and the terrifying decision to let someone actually love them. It wasn't the life Nora had planned when she left Ohio with a laptop and dreams of corporate success. It was better. It was real. Lily's cry echoed from the apartment upstairs, not distressed, but demanding. Owen laughed. "That's my cue. Someone wants another story." She's going to be spoiled, growing up in a bookstore with a father who does all the voices. That's the plan. He kissed her quickly, thoroughly. "You coming up?" "In a minute. I want to finish this update." She watched him jog up the stairs, heard his voice drift down as he started another story for their daughter, and allowed herself a moment of pure gratitude. For the man who'd sat with her in a stairwell without questions. For the neighbor who'd become her husband, who'd become her partner in every possible way. For the bookstore they'd built, and the family they'd chosen, and the ordinary, extraordinary magic of showing up for each other every single day. Not bad for a fake marriage, she thought. Not bad at all.